So, now let's talk about how all of the planets are arranged. Because from the first time that we tried to figure all of this stuff out, if we go back to this picture on the right here, it sure looks like the Earth is just staying still and like everything else is moving around the Earth. And if you would have gone to the other side of the Earth or anywhere else on the Earth, you would notice the same thing. So the first hypothesis that was put forward was this geocentric theory on the left here. And basically what they said is, okay, we are at the middle. We know that the sun kind of goes around and then comes back up in the morning. So let's say that the sun is pretty close. We also know that the moon is pretty close. And then they put everything else on the outside. We'll talk about some issues they had with that in a sec. But where they got to and kind of tried to fix it was they were like, no, wait, sun is in the middle. We'll call that the heliocentric model. And this was like a debate ongoing for like, I think 100 years or something like that. So Aristotle was the one who was like, Earth must be in the middle because everything seems to rotate around the Earth. And so he said, stars always seem to stay in kind of the same place. It must be because they're on, I'm looking at the picture on the right, it must be because they're on the like outside border almost, kind of like the inside of a tennis ball. And then the Earth is like the very center of the tennis ball. And the tennis ball is rotating, but the Earth is staying in the very middle. And then he had the planets at various stages throughout, which kind of made sense. Like if the stars are all staying in the same place relative to each other, that sounded pretty reasonable. But there was this issue where sometimes the planets would move backwards. And so that didn't really make sense with thinking about them as on these paths. And so the Greeks were obsessed with circles, by the way. Like they thought that everything to do with planets and planetary motion, it was kind of a religious influence as well, but they just really liked the idea of a perfect circle, perfect spheres, all that kind of stuff. So what they said is, okay, Venus, for example, or Mars, has to be moving in a circle because that is the way that the gods have set up the orbits of the planets. But that didn't make sense for how they could sometimes move backwards. That's called retrograde motion. Because if you think of something going around in a circle, it should keep going around in that same circle. But when it started to move backwards, what they said, I'm looking at epicycles right now in the bottom right picture. What they said is that yes, you are on an orbit around the sun or around the Earth, but then within that, it's also doing its own little circles on the side. And this was a really convoluted way to explain that retrograde motion where the planets seemed like they were moving backwards. And it was like really difficult geometrically to put it all together, but it did more or less check out. And so they had this idea where, okay, instead of just one circle, now we have two circles. Yeah, so that's what we mean when we say epicycles. So most people agreed that Earth must be in the middle. And we talked a little bit about religious influence. Like there's this idea that like humans were put here by God or by the gods. And so we are the important center of the universe piece. Like we have been created for whatever our purpose is. We must be the center of the universe or center of the solar system. Nicholas Copernicus said, wait, what if we're being a little self-righteous here? What if that actually doesn't check out with everything? What if we're all actually rotating around the sun? That, as you can probably imagine, was not a very popular opinion at the time. So debate went on for, 100 years or so. And then this guy named Kepler was like, I can confirm what Copernicus is saying. So now we had two people. I'm trying to go back here. Now we had okay. So we had two people now saying that sun is at the center, Earth is just rotating around. And the way that he did this is he said, okay, we got to get out of this like everything is a perfect circle mindset. Sometimes it's just a little bit messier than that. And he said, orbits are not perfect circles. There's no epicycles going on. There's no circle within a circle. There are elliptical orbits, meaning that as the Earth goes around the sun, it is not in a perfect circle. It is in kind of an oval shape. And then they were like, yeah, okay, but we still don't really like this idea because we still want to be the most important. And then another 80 years go by, and Newton comes up with this universal gravitation rule and further confirms elliptical orbits.